Sometimes they have highs, they have lows. Sometimes they can be raving lunatics, depending on the mood it's taking them.
From seeing it on the telly, it's kind of like one extreme to another.
Yes, it's used to be called something else, didn't it? And I can't really... Manic depression, there we go.
Over the past 2 years, I watched one of my friends struggle with a deep depression which seemed to have no root. In May 2009, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Like many people in the UK, I made the assumption that bipolar sufferers were constantly switching between a psychotic mania and suicidal depression, when in fact the reality is far more complex.
It's called bipolar mood affective disorder, and it's basically an inability to control your mood stemming from some kind of medical, hormone imbalance or chemical imbalance or something in your brain. So basically my moods can fluctuate between being severely depressed or severely manic, which is what it's called, or very, which is like kind of overexcited, hyper, for no apparent reason, and I can't control it. I really like the way that my brain works sometimes, is that I can talk very coherently, and I can do lots of things that at 100 miles an hour. I can work really quickly, and I can be quite creative about things and all that stuff, and that's brilliant. But the depressive side of it is such a major part of my life that is awful.
Bipolar disorder is a serious mental illness which can be hugely distressing for sufferers and their friends and family. But the illness can take on many forms. Gary Malloy has been battling with bipolar for over 20 years, and his experience of the illness has been vastly different to Mike's.
Obviously people do have differences in mood, and people can be up and down at certain times, but with bipolar that I experienced and I had, it was more extreme. I had to be just driven in an emergency to the hospital, and completely just started throwing furniture around and was in a complete psychotic state. So I classed that as the breakdown. It's my first kind of breakdown, and I had to be admitted and injected and sedated, kind of. So it was very, very serious, and just horrendous, so frightening.
Type 1 bipolar disorder is the most severe form of the illness, as sufferers experience full-blown manic episodes. These may cause them to overestimate their abilities, hallucinate, and have delusions of grandeur. Although a depressive episode is not needed for diagnosis, most type 1 patients experience some form of depression. Although he does experience some symptoms of mania, Mike has not encountered a full-blown manic episode like Gary has. His bipolar is at the other end of the spectrum, meaning he can experience intense depressive episodes which can quickly make him a danger to himself.
The thing with bipolar disorder, it's like if you wake up one morning and stub your toe, you think, oh, that was irritating, and maybe it drops your mood down a smidge, but then you just carry on with it. Whereas if you're bipolar, you can wake up in the morning and stub your toe, and as soon as your mood starts heading in one direction, you can't stop it. So it just carries on going down and down and down. So one day I had an argument. This is probably the most recent example of a very severe episode. Had an argument with one of my friends, and I just got very, very depressed. It lasted about a week of me getting worse and worse and worse, and I ended up on a bridge trying to kill myself.
Depression is the main symptom of bipolar type 2, but sufferers will also experience less severe manic episodes called hypermania. Although these are a far less extreme form of mania, it can still create a significant impact on everyday life.
I always describe myself as not getting embarrassed. I don't get embarrassed by things, and I always do things very spontaneously. If I suddenly think something's a good idea, I'll go and do it. My money is a nightmare. I spend all of my money as soon as I get it. If I'm in a manic mood, if I'm depressed, then I just sit there crying about how much money I don't have.
Once sufferers reveal they have a mental condition such as bipolar disorder, they can find that people react to them in an entirely different way.
I bumped into an old friend, and I'd explained to him what had happened and everything. He said, "But you're talking to me and you seem pretty polite and having a good chat, and I gave him my number to give me a call, and he didn't call back. So that was a kind of experience of someone, and I think it was because of me having had experience of mental health issue, having had that diagnosis. He didn't want to know. I think people are so afraid of being around people or being friendly with someone who's had a mental health condition because the media and the press coverage and everything around it is so negative. In the papers you'll hear horror stories and phrases thrown around, and whether it be this nut has done that or on TV. So the whole issue around is still prehistoric.
I wish I could make someone bipolar for a day, because I had this guy, a friend of mine, who said, "Oh, you don't need to take that medication, you don't need therapy, blah blah blah." And if I had taken his advice and come off my medication, I would be having serious problems now.
Yeah.
But he just can't grasp it. He's never had any kind of depression.
Yeah.
I think people who've been depressed can understand more, because if you say to them, "Oh, I get depressed a lot," they think, "Oh, that's a big thing." But if you say to someone, "Oh, I get depressed a lot," and they think, "Oh yeah, well I get upset," that kind of thing happens to me.
An illness as unpredictable as bipolar disorder creates many problems for the people living with it, but by far the biggest is stigma. Many sufferers battle with whether or not to tell the people they know and love about their illness because of the fear of prejudice.
It was mainly people telling me that something was wrong. Even now, I kind of don't really believe it. Although I know that there's something that's not the same as everybody else about me, to me it feels normal. One of the reasons that I don't tell people is because I don't think people really care. If you say to somebody you're mentally ill, then people immediately assume that you're either going to kill yourself there and then, or that you're going to start talking to yourself, or something really insane. It's just something that's built into us. People like to feel safe and to feel normal, and there's something about people being mental that doesn't feel safe.
Jessica is one of the many people with bipolar who choose not to tell others about their illness for fear of rejection and ridicule. But is the stigma a reality? I went to my hometown of Chelmsford to find out.
It's not as if you've got something physical wrong with you, like cancer or, a real physical problem. So, for example, if you had cancer, you can go into work and say, "Look, my sister's had cancer, I need some time off." But to explain that someone's gone mad and spent some time in a mental hospital is actually quite a hard thing to do. And I think that mental illness needs to be given the same significance as a physical illness as well.
I'm glad that there's people with high profile bipolar disorder, because it spreads it around for everybody, lets everybody to know about it, and educates the public about what is a very serious mental illness.
It needs to be sort of more of a sensible portrayal of it. Like Stephen Fry has it, doesn't he? And people like that are obviously so intelligent and collected. It would be quite good to sort of see more people like that as a portrayal of it, instead of someone who's going crazy and doing mental things.
I'm 19. I got diagnosed 2 years ago. I've had it since they reckon I was about 8. Now, I haven't gone and offed myself. I'm not walking down the street, talking to myself. I'm not crazy. They need to do things like this where people can see real people with bipolar, not people that have been hired in by a film crew with bipolar to talk about it. Real people that have got bipolar, sharing their experiences and saying, actually, I'm not mad.
Gary Malloy is one person who wants to tackle the stigma head-on. He has worked for MDF, the bipolar organisation, for 5 years, and whilst working there, he has found that helping people understand mental illness is one way the stigma can be lessened.
I talked to such a range of people, from people who actually sufferers themselves, to family members, to experts, professionals who wanted advice. So I was just getting so much experience in doing that. I can imagine once a father found out about his son who had just been taken into hospital at 21, and a lot of the things he'd been talking about mirrored my own experience. So I could really give him advice about what had happened to me, what kind of things had happened, and he said he found that so useful, because he wouldn't have known where to go to get that advice. And when I was speaking to my brother, he said the same thing. If he had got that advice early on, it would have made so much of a difference if someone would just explain to him what was going on. It needs to change, but you know, with positive role models and stories and people who are doing it to say, this is how I did this, or I kind of got along the road of getting better.
For many sufferers, the isolation that mental health stigma can cause will be a massive hindrance on their road to getting well. 10 years ago, Gary started at Core Arts, an organisation which encourages people with serious mental health problems to use art to break down these prejudices.
I think that was a major factor, really, in me getting well. I was talking to my key worker, who was at the time, who recommended me going on to Core Arts. I went there, had a look around and thought, this isn't for me. The first time I went there, and then I kind of went back 6 months later and got involved. I don't know even why I went back, because at the time I was quite fragile and quite in the midst of the illness, quite unwell, and I thought, you know, I couldn't really do this art thing. I couldn't get involved. It's not something I'd want to do. So I kind of went out. I thought, I'm not going back there. But something in me just thought, I want to go back. Went back in there, and in the first class, when it was really funny that I painted a fire extinguisher. Yeah. And in my book, the tutor who was with us for 10 years there had mentioned that the first thing I painted was a fire extinguisher. It was as if it was putting the fire out of what happened with the illness. So that was the first thing I did, and I've done so much since then, all the way through. But that we remember that sitting down, it was just a still life of a fire extinguisher on the table. We painted that, and it was kind of, for me, it was the beginning, in the sense of self-managing and really getting on top of the illness, and so I feel good about that.
When I first told my mum and dad that I was depressed, they didn't believe me, and then they gradually saw it in me and they believed me. And then after I was diagnosed and I was on medication and I started therapy and I started trying to fix it, they walked around on, you know, eggshells with me. They didn't want to upset me. They didn't have a go at me for anything for months. And I said to them, you know, I just in the end I had to say to them, like, I want you to just treat me the same as you always have done, because nothing's changed for me. I've just got a name for how I am.
1 in 4 of us will experience some form of mental illness in our lifetimes, so it's important that we tackle the stigma that surrounds it. As a society, we need to try and understand these illnesses before judging them, and sufferers need to stand against discrimination. But they must also realise that not all people will turn and run when their condition is brought to light.
From the telly, from the media, it's shown it as quite a kind of scary prospect, because like EastEnders and Shames are quite dramatic portrayals of it, from the really crazy things where they could do. I think one episode was just like smashing things around the room, because you don't know when they're going to change.
Yeah, I don't know when they're going to switch.
People don't know how to react to that or to help, and I think it scares them a bit, and that's maybe why they tend to back away from stuff like that.
There's so many different degrees, aren't there, of mental illness, and there's such a small percentage that actually would lead you to need to be scared. So I think it's just education, isn't it? People need to know more about it.
You don't see many features around that say this person had a mental illness and this is what it was like, or, you know, I don't think there's like kind of much around really, much information. So for my part, you know, I always explain to people that my sister has mental health problems, because that's something small that I can do to just raise awareness of what it's like.
If you've been affected by any of the issues in this programme, please visit MDF the Bipolar Organisation's website at www.mdf.org.uk.
You held me close to your chest as we cried, and a tear didn't even leave your eyes.